Welcome to the Ursulines of Cincinnati's archives. Our archives consist of working rooms, storage rooms, and a display room. You are looking at the entrance to the display room. The display room has a bench for seating and a few archival displays, stained glass window, and dedications to the people who made this archives display possible. They're a group of alums who have been very dedicated to St. Ursula through the years, and we're anxious to let the history of the Ursulines of Cincinnati be known. As we enter the archives, we will see the crucifix that hangs on the wall. The crucifix was the original crucifix that hung in the original chapel, which is in the front parlor of the Wooster House on the first floor of St. Ursula. As we scan over, we will see a triptych made of ivory that was a gift from Mr. and Mrs. Runnels, friends of the sisters. The Runnels funded the sisters' trip to Ireland in 1919. That trip to Ireland, the purpose of that trip to Ireland was to recruit young sisters to join the religious community here. That trip was very successful. There were several young Irish girls who came back to Cincinnati and joined the sisters here at St. Ursula. On the wall in the archives, we have a photo of the shrine of St. Ursula. This shrine was created by a German artist in the 15th century. It depicts St. Ursula and all of her companions, and they were all martyred and in the 5th century. Each face depicts a different event of the martyrdom. This shrine is actually located in Belgium, and this picture was a gift to the sisters at St. Ursula. Here we have a stained glass window. This was found by Sister Jerome and salvaged from the basement of the Church of the Immaculata in Mount Adams. She was able to bring it here and hang it in the entrance to the archives, and it provides beautiful and perfect light on a sunny day. We are now looking at ivory carvings, also located at the entrance of the archives, that were a gift in 1916 to the Sisters of St. Ursula from Elizabeth Dudley Tulich. Angela Marici was born in northern Italy in 1470s to a wealthy family. Both her mother and father and her sister, to whom she was very close, died in her teen years. She was devastated by the loss of her family and devastated by the loss of her sister. She was desperate to know that her sister was safe in heaven. And while working in the fields one day, she had a vision. And the vision was of what she interpreted to be her sister. And her sister said that she was serene, that she was happy, that she was with God. At that point, St. Angela decided to establish a community of young women like herself that would join a religious order. That religious order would be different from other religious orders in that they, unlike others who lived in community, would actually live with the poor that they were helping and working to save. The next slide talks about the establishment of the Ursulines of Cincinnati. In 1910, after the Ursulines had been in Brown County, Ohio for over 50 years, 20 of them formed a group to come to Cincinnati. That group was no longer called the Ursulines of Brown County, but the Ursulines of Cincinnati. They established their community at 1339 East McMillan Street with Mother Baptista and Mother Fidelis as the two leaders of the community. They worked hard. They established a school. The school ran from kindergarten to the 12th grade. They recruited young women to join their community, and the school is still in existence to this day, well over 100 years later. The Ursulines chose Walnut Hills for their school because Walnut Hills was a thriving and very prosperous neighborhood. They were able to buy 2 homes in the area. Actually, the homes were next door to one another. The first home they bought in 1910 was the Wooster House, and that is the house that, if you're looking at St. Ursula from McMillan Street, it would be on the far left. 1 year later, they were able to buy the Harrison House. If you're looking at St. Ursula from McMillan, that would be the house on the far right. Now owning 2 homes, they were able to build a temporary walkway between the 2 homes. That temporary walkway enabled the students and the sisters to walk from one building to the other without going outside. That walkway was only there for a few years because it was taken down and moved to the back of the Worcester House when, in 1914, they were able to begin the building of the chapel that is now in that location at St. Ursula Academy. Shortly after the sisters purchased the two homes, they turned their great interest to building a chapel. They were going to have to raise a substantial amount of money in order to build the chapel, and after purchasing those two homes, they knew they were going to have to start from scratch. When out of nowhere, unbeknownst to them, the Archbishop of Cincinnati sent Bellamy Storer and Maria Longworth Storer to visit St. Ursula. The Storers had been living in Europe for the past 10 years. They were converts to Catholicism, and they had in Europe a private chapel in each home they lived in and a private priest to say Mass every single morning, and that's what they wanted here. Archbishop Muller explained to them that while Europeans could do that kind of thing, it wasn't done in this country. However, he suggested that they go visit the nuns at St. Ursula. He knew they were in need of a chapel and they were in need of money to fund it, and he thought maybe the Storers could help. They came to the front chapel of the Worcester House. They visited with Mother Fidelis. They explained what they wanted, and she said she would love to have them live there. However, there wasn't enough room. They barely had enough room for the sisters and their students. At that point, Mariah and her husband said, well, what if we build ourselves a home on the back of the Harrison house? Then we will help you build the chapel. The sisters were delighted. It was wonderful. Not only were they getting the chapel that they needed, but they were getting an extension on their school, which they hoped through the years was going to grow, and they would need that extension. Mariah and Bellamy were great friends of the sisters. They always remained in contact with the sisters. However, they only lived here about 3 or 4 years when Bellamy had a stroke, and Mariah wanted to take him back to Europe where their daughter lived and their niece lived so that they could visit. They made that trip back to Paris, but never made it back to this country. They're both buried in France, and the sisters have a long relationship with them, stayed in contact with them, and have many of the artifacts and furnitures that the Storers left behind when they went back to France. With the building of the chapel, their school was complete, or nearly complete, because nothing is ever complete with the Ursulines of Cincinnati. They continue to grow at all times. By the time they got to 1930s, they were here 25 years. They had a thriving school. They also had a boarding school. But things were changing, and that more and more girls were joining this community, and it was time to eliminate the boarding school so that they had more room for their convent. They lived through troubling times. World War I, lasting for about 4 years, and the teenage years were difficult on everyone. The Great Depression was probably even harder. That is when everybody was suffering economically. The enrollment declined a bit. It was only to be expected, and they hoped for a great recovery when the Depression was over. The Depression ends, and World War II is in effect in the late 30s and in the early 40s. The sisters were very generous, working through all of World War II, volunteering their roof as a lookout for the advancement of any kind of planes that might be coming over. They made various articles, sent all kinds of materials to the troops. They worked very hard, got through the Second World War, and entered into the peaceful decade of the 50s. The 50s showed great growth in the academy, and they had enough foresight to realize that with the baby boomers who were being born in the early 50s, their school was going to have to become much larger in order to handle all of the girls that would eventually become. That is when they began to make plans to add a gym on the back of the property behind the Worcester House. The turbulent times of the 60s and 70s brought its own set of challenges for the sisters. The civil rights movement and the need to diversify the academy, the Vietnam War and the turbulence that it brought to the communities that we all lived in. But I think the greatest change in the turbulent 60s was the Vatican II Council. That was the council that opened the windows to the church to bring in new light and to bring into fresh air, and it brought many changes that I don't think anybody really fully anticipated. It brought great changes to religious life in this country and to religious life in this community. All these religious orders were mandated by the Vatican Council to shed the garb that they wore, the 15th century clothing that they wore, that their foundresses wore, to get into modern times, to be able to dress more contemporarily, although modestly, that they could now drive and go out in public and become social workers and people who help the people in the community, much as Angela did in the 15th century. They were once again emerging out into the community to do the type of work that Angela did. Teaching methods were beginning to change, and St. Ursula was at the forefront. One of their sisters developed a whole method of teaching phonics to children. Her method became nationally known. She appeared on television to promote her method of teaching phonics. She brought great contributions to the sisters here at St. Ursula. The area of time that we're speaking of also brought a push for outreach and diversity. The Sisters of St. Ursula went to Florida and recruited Cubans who had just been recently Cuban nuns who had recently been exiled from Cuba. They brought them back to Cincinnati. They housed them. They enabled them to learn English. They got them on their feet financially, and those Cuban nuns lived here. They brought some Cuban families here. They also lived here and worked here. They had a program to begin to recruit African-American girls to attend the academy, and they began a GED or religious education program for the community and outreach programs for the youth of this area. An entire set of new challenges were met in the 1980s with the shrinking community of religious orders and religious nuns here at St. Ursula. They were now becoming as much social workers as they were high school teachers. They worked in campus ministry and religious education, archiving our history. They worked in Catholic communications, social outreach, and community health and counseling. In 1903, a group of sisters joined the Voice of the Faithful to support those who had been abused by priests, to support the priest of integrity, and to shape the structural change of the church. Also, at that time, an alum of St. Ursula, Virginia Knoll, died, leaving her estate to the sisters, at which they used to establish the Starfish Project. The Starfish Project was and is a project whose goal is to help women in the community, mainly single women who have very few resources, and the money from this project enables those women to be able to leave the home in order to work, to provide them with childcare, to provide them with social services and social services assistance. It brings a crisis into opportunity by providing financial grants and contacts with networks of volunteers. The Sisters of St. Ursula, the Ursulines of Cincinnati, actually taught in over 15 schools in the diocese, and they worked at least 5 to 7 missions in the diocese. Holy Name was the first school that they staffed. They were staffing that school when they came to McMillan Street. They also staffed St. Monica School, located in Clifton and not far from Holy Name. For a short time, they were at Nativity School in Pleasant Ridge. Knowing that there was going to be a change as schools were moving further out into the suburbs, and realizing that those schools would eventually be places where the sisters would be recruiting students, they decided that they would teach at those schools when they were asked. They went to Our Lady of Visitation on the far west side, and they went to All Saints on the far east side. Both of those schools provided them with students through the years. Both of those schools provided them with young women who entered their community, and the school in Visitation gave them an entrance into the west side of Cincinnati. They also taught at St. Francis de Sales, St. Agnes in Bond Hill, and at, of course, St. Ursula Villa. They moved their grade school to St. Ursula Villa in the 1960s when it was becoming too crowded to house both a grade school and a high school on McMillan Street. The title of this placard is The Efforts of Many, and that is very true. Listed here are generous donors, very generous donors to the Sisters of St. Ursula. We've already spoken of the first person on this list, which is Mariah Longworth. She and her husband contributed greatly, helping to build the chapel and the back of the Harrison House. Mr. and Mrs. William Runnels are the couple that funded the sisters' trip to Ireland in 1919, where they recruited young women to join their community. Sir John J. Faring established the St. Ursula Academy music program. He was with the sisters for many years. He was known throughout the Archdiocese as a master of music. On the bottom tier, we get to Elizabeth Dolly, a friend of Sister Jerome's. She was also then became a very close benefactor and friend of St. Ursula. A dear one to all of us is the next woman on this placard, that is Roberta Foley. She was a long-time teacher at St. Ursula, a graduate of the Schuster Martin School, long known to the sisters. She made a daily trip here from the far west of Sailor Park and was a marvelous teacher. The next are the Curry sisters, both who went here for 12 years, both who were very generous in giving to St. Ursula and did so their entire long lives. Manuel Chavez is a very exceptional businessman who helped the sisters establish the charitable trust for their retirement years. He is a great benefactor to the sisters. Also listed here is Dr. and Mrs. Dornhagen. Dr. Dornhagen was a psychiatrist, and he, along with many other physicians, donated their time to keep the sisters here at St. Ursula healthy throughout their lives. The placard in this room is the Rookwood collection, and as you can imagine, this is much of what Mariah left here at St. Ursula when she and Bellamy went back to France. Here we have two of the pieces of Rookwood that belong to Mariah. These are expensive and valuable pieces. Rookwood had different kinds of pottery. There were the collections, which this is, and there were the production pieces, like tiles that you found in people's bathrooms and fireplaces in homes. These are the most valuable pieces because these have precious artwork on them. We also have three more of Mariah's pieces here, again with detailed artwork. These would be precious and very expensive pieces. Our prize piece here is the Eye of the Tiger, and it is a beautiful piece. Beginning here, we have a few pieces from the Bellamy Store collection. That's Mariah's husband. Very interesting piece here is his chair. In those days when you were a congressman, and he was a congressman from the 1st District of Cincinnati, you brought your own chair with you to Congress. And this is the chair that Bellamy brought with him and used in Congress for the term that he served as congressman from Cincinnati. Here we have the hat that was worn by Bellamy when he was named Ambassador Austria-Hungary. He was named the ambassador under Theodore Roosevelt, and he served also as ambassador to Belgium before he served as the legal liaison to Spain at the end of the Spanish-American War. And this was what he wore when he was on formal occasions. And that box under the hat is the box that his hat was stored in when he traveled. The marble top table is also a table that the Longworths had when they were in Austria. Mariah's getting older and she no longer can stand. She cannot work pottery for great lengths of time, and so she still is very artistic, so she turned her attention to coppers. These are 4 of her coppers. What she did was take sheets of copper and tap on them from the back, making pictures that were framed. She used fish, she used, I think that's a little monkey, she used swans, she used different animals to carve out or tap out on the back of coppers to make these artistic designs. Here we have a few more pieces of rookwood that belong to Mariah and a few of her smaller coppers. Mariah left these coppers here when they went to France. Probably our most famous and valuable piece of rookwood. It is a vase. It was left here by Mariah, and her family has come and stayed at Cincinnati in the years after their passing. So all of these pieces were left here not only by Mariah, but in future generations by her descendants. These 2 paintings are by Martin Reddick. Martin Reddick was an artist at Rookwood, and he was also a student of Frank Duveneau. These 2 paintings were a gift of the 3 sisters who were early graduates of St. Ursula, the McGevely sisters. One of the McGevely sisters was Margaret, who married a man by the name of Reddick, and there is no relationship between them. But Margaret McGevely Reddick's daughter, Kit, is a docent and a volunteer in the archives at St. Ursula. In the cases, we have collections of relics that belong to the sisters here at St. Ursula. And as we go on walking down, we have early relics of and souvenirs of the life here in the convent. We have prayer books, prayer cards, fans. We have displays of the life of living in this convent, how they had water pitchers, they made all their own habits. Can you imagine the size of that scissors? We also have artifacts from their high school and their teaching years. These are books that display the college preparatory classes that were held here, the chalkboards that were used by the grade school students in the early years. We have a display of one of the St. Ursula annuals. From the time the school was founded in 1910 until the early 1940s, there was one annual per class done by the senior class, all handwritten, and all the art is original. They had put them together with pins and ribbon, and they are well established and saved, and also have been scanned so that further use can be used by the students, because now the paper is getting very thin and worn. We have pictures of the foundresses here, of Mother Fidelis and Mother Baptista, Mother Birchman, the early founders of the school. We actually now, we're coming up to the bell that rang even in our day at St. Ursula. In the 60s, that bell was rung for every class, for class to start, for class to end, for the school day to begin, for the school day to end. That was high tech in our day at St. Ursula. These are the examples of the books that were used in the grade school. Have an example here of one of the sisters' passports that they used to go to Ireland for that trip. We are now into about the 1940s, when Mr. Faring was the music director here at St. Ursula. He was knighted. We have his knighted sword. We have pictures of him teaching classes here. We have pictures of him being honored by the Archbishop at the cathedral. Further artifacts of the school, the school handbook. We have a journal of all the monies that were spent and all the monies that were taken in, all done and by hand, this one in 1937. We have other artifacts that the sisters have collected through the years, more programs, more established brochures that were used through the school year. This is a program of one of the dinners that was held, the menu, the people who were in attendance, all to benefit the Sisters of St. Ursula. Here we have 2 volumes of the necrologies of the sisters. These necrologies are brief histories of the sisters. It gives the dates that they entered, the schools in which they served, the dates that they died.